be here. This is my 6th summit, and the organization's 10th. Can you believe that 10 years ago, students were coming to the summit to literally create GlobeMed, and now we're here? That's surreal to me, and probably to many others in this room. My name is Alyssa Smaldino, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of GlobeMed. I'm also an alumna of the GlobeMed at George Washington University, which I'll tell you a little bit about that soon. But first, I want to introduce our brilliant, wonderful team of staff and students so that you know who can help you throughout the weekend and also to recognize the incredible work that they've done in making this possible. So, Alexis Barnes, and what staff, can you just stand and wave when I say your name? Oh, Alexis just left. Oh, you're right here. She's also a former staff member of GlobeMed at UCLA's partner in Uganda. She's really the mastermind behind a lot of the content that you'll engage with this weekend, along with the rest of the team that made this event possible. That team includes Parth Joshi, our event operations. Parth is also an alum of GlobeMed at Loyola. Rosalind Dillon, who's our event operations consultant, and I know and she's an alum of GlobeMed at CU Boulder. And then our 3 amazing Northwestern students who make up the summit team, including Rajan Nagasa, also not here. Usually they show up. No, they're in class, I think. Priya Garigapati and Jamil Marabito. Caroline Nguyen is our Director of Communications. She's also an alum of GlobeMed at UCLA. She and her amazing team design all of the beautiful materials, emails, documents, and videos that you see from us this weekend and every day. And the team is made up of Nick Garbati. And the other side that unfortunately can't be with us this weekend, she's at another global health conference. Priya Fremerman is our newest staff member as the Director of Operational Systems. And she is a fellow GlobeMed at George Washington alumna. Sheng Xiao Yu is our Director of Partnerships. She coordinates all Grow and Partnership programming along with Neha Reddy, who's a student at Northwestern and a former member of GlobeMed at Northwestern. And last but not least, our Chapter Support Associate, Brittany Zelch, together by advising and supporting all of our amazing chapters. She's an alumna of GlobeMed at Northwestern, and she works with a team of 3 students, Neil Thivilapil, I don't even know how to say your last name, guys. Neil's in the back, Avi, and Suhas, which are in class. So I hope you all have a chance to get to know them throughout the weekend. They're the best people that I could ever want to spend every day of my life with. And so this weekend is one of those special, rare spaces that we want to keep safe, positive, and inclusive. So please know that when you're here, your voice matters, and the voice of those around you matter as well. So be aware of how often you're speaking and how intently you're listening. I encourage you to step back if you feel you're dominating a conversation, like GlobeMeders might tend to do. And lean in if you have something on your mind that you feel needs to be said. If at any point this weekend you feel like something that was said was inappropriate or hurtful, please know that I'm here to help you address that throughout the weekend, along with any of our staff, but specifically Alexis and Caroline. And so with that said, I think this is going to be a space that's on fire with ideas and opinions. So let's respect, love, and support each other and those ideas and opinions. So what is it that will ignite the fire inside each of us this weekend? I want to refer you to your beautiful programs that were designed by an alum of GlobeMed at Lawrence University, Jamie Cartwright. Where Jamie is. Where's Jamie?
He's coming in tonight.
He's not here either. So in your program, you can see that this morning, our co-founder Victor Roy and I are going to be opening up with some stories to ground us in our history. After that, we're going to hear from some awesome change makers who include many of our partners and alumni in a slightly different format of panel than we've done in the past. So you get to hear a lot of people in a shorter period of time. This afternoon, we're going to spend 2 full hours in an interactive future building session where we will build GlobeMed's future. And I'll tell you more about that after lunch. Tomorrow morning, our day will kick off bright and early again with the optional identity caucuses, and there'll be new ones. So you'll have to check your materials to see if you want to join a caucus in the morning. I encourage you to attend at least one throughout the weekend. Then you'll have a space to meet with some of our speakers in our networking session and then become inspired by our keynote panelists at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Throughout the rest of the day tomorrow, which will be our second and last day, full day, there will be think tanks where you can think about the ways that you want to apply this experience and everything you've learned throughout the weekend to make your chapter and your partnership thrive and to help you succeed as a young professional. You'll also get some hands-on engagements with some speakers in our first ever Discovery Dialogues, which I'm really excited about. Those also include many of our alumni, as well as some activists and change makers from around Chicago and the country. And then we'll all be together for our closing dinner tomorrow night to conclude the celebratory weekend. So let's do it. Over the next hour, Victor and I are going to share pieces of our stories in the hope that we will be able to open up space for all of us to get vulnerable and dig deep with each other over the next couple of days. So let me take you back to the 1990s. I was a young girl. That's me. In the small town of Butler, Pennsylvania. I think I was born curious, possibly born with that book in my hand. I had an innate affinity for learning, reading, and questioning. My mom tells me that I only came home from elementary school crying one time. It is because I was bored. That's usually the only reason I cry now, too. You can actually fact check that later if you want, because my mom and dad are here. But I grew up in a town that felt relatively isolated, and my curiosity often led me to the library or the woods in our backyard where I would read, write, and explore. I also spent a lot of time at the computer when we got the Encyclopedia Britannica CD-ROM. And I had this memory of learning basic anatomy and wondering, why are certain people treated differently based on external appearances that seem circumstantial, when inside, we really all look like this? I recall thinking, I want to live a life that recognizes these fundamental similarities as humans and help others see that everyone is equal on the inside and the outside. So fast forward 15 years. I'm a member of GlobeMed at George Washington University, and my understanding of why people are not treated equally is developing. Our partner organization was in Rwanda, this beautiful country. And so I oriented most, if not all, of my research in public health around the country's history and progress. In the spring of 2010, I spent a semester in Denmark and took a human rights course that allowed me to spend a whole 4 months researching and writing a paper on the role of the West in the Rwandan genocide. This is a long and complicated story. But as I was reading letters that the Belgian and French colonists had written home about the people of the Great Lakes region, which now includes Rwanda, I was really struck by the way that they made assumptions about individuals' worth based on their appearance. And this is in the 1600s. In fact, René Le Marchand said in his 2002 article entitled A History of Genocide in Rwanda, there would have been no genocide had the Belgians not racialized the Tutsi into settlers. That was the ethnic group that was affected most by the genocide. And a lot of scholars think this, including me. I'm not a scholar, but I think that. And so I kept thinking about this and wondering, how can this change? How can one be seen as worthy and valuable because they're human, not because they're light-skinned or tall or whatever it might be? And then here I was in GlobeMed at GW, in this really pragmatic pursuit to overcome these historically entrenched perceptions of whose lives matter. Back in DC, my chapter was collaborating with our partner in Rwanda day in and day out, developing the infrastructure and community to dramatically change Rwandan women's ability to access healthcare and nutritious food options for themselves and their children. We were doing work that acted as a counterpoint to this oppressive history, just like you're all doing with your partners. Alistair McIntyre said, to answer the question, what are you to do? You have to first answer the question, what stories do you find yourself a part of? So I've shared one of these stories that brought me to what I'm doing today with you all. And now I want to introduce one of our founding members and our first executive director, Victor Roy, who's going to help start a conversation about the kinds of stories we found ourselves a part of 10 years ago and those that we might find ourselves a part of today.
Thanks, Alyssa. It's really amazing to be here. I think I can't start without reflecting back. I think it's actually one of our first dinners was actually in this room 10 years ago. I think you were at one of those events. A lot of you were. And to think that we could be here is a huge testimony to what a small group of people can start, but also the generations of growth and impact can create. And it's deeply moving to be able to come back and see this. This is my first summit in 4 years. And so, whoa, in terms of the energy just even last night or this morning. And for the record, we did not, when we began, imagine this, right? I don't think anyone could have predicted that. And so, as I've been reflecting, I live in the UK right now, and I was walking into a card shop the other day, and I saw this, whoops, let's see. We're in the middle of my presentation.
Sorry.
Can we get it?
Yep.
I was in a card shop and I saw this card. So if you see me around this weekend, I think, give me a high five. I'm not exactly sure how the British would say this exactly. That shit deserves a high five. The best British accent I can do. But it's a good card shop in London. So going back to that first summit, I think back to a small group of students who were in a classroom. We had lots of great workshops, we had keynote speakers, but I remember in particular a small group of people asking some iteration of these sets of questions. What is to be done in the world? What can we do? Or what might GlobeMed become? And what am I going to do? And in many ways, that conversation ignited everything that came after. But what I want to talk about a little bit is what actually brought those students together in that room in the first place. And so I'm going to start with the story that I can tell, which is that at the time, as an undergrad at Northwestern, I was encountering friends and students like myself who wanted to make a mark, make a difference in the world, and yet we were encountering what I'll call failures of imagination in terms of what we could do. So this is my good friend and fellow co-founder, Peter Legault. And one of the first things we did in that in 2006 was we went on a medical mission trip to Guatemala. And on this trip, we spent about a week to 10 days doing lots of basically Band-Aid work. And we knew we were doing that, particularly afterwards reflecting back, that the potential that we had as young people, as Peter and myself and the group that we were with, was not being tapped into, and that the potential of the indigenous community we were working with in Guatemala and the voices were being completely neglected, right? So there was a failure of imagination in terms of what people could do together, essentially. And this was just the first in a series of encounters that year I remember having with students, with friends that I would encounter in a place like rural Ghana, actually. And so I remember a time where, before I get into this story, actually, I was in an internet cafe and I walked in and there's the Northwestern webmail up on somebody's computer, all the way in rural Ghana. And I was wondering, what the heck is a Northwestern student doing here? And at that time, that was a fairly infrequent encounter to be having. And it was a student, Rachel Berkowitz, who soon joined GlobeMed, trying to connect back home, but she was working in Ghana, trying to figure out, working with a community-based organization and struggling, trying to figure out how to do it. We started talking about what we were both struggling with, because I was in Ghana on a project that had taken me there because of students prior to me to work on building a health center there in rural Ghana. And prior to me, the students had already raised the funds for the project. And when I got to the Hope Center, I was supposed to work on taking the next steps. When I got there, I found an empty building, beautiful structure with nothing in it. And I soon started asking questions about why this was the case. And Joseph Achana was a community leader that had been part of the project. And I started talking to him, and he started sharing that the students that had come before me had basically gone in their own direction. They had started off working with him, but had decided to go on in their own direction, hiring people from outside of the community, and essentially taking them out of the process and the group of people that were initially involved. And after a while going back and forth, I asked him, this is a story that many of you are familiar with, but it's worth sharing again, him shutting the door to the car that we were driving in and looking me in the face and saying, you know, as I asked him, why did you let this happen? Why was this the outcome of that relationship? And he said, we're African. We listen to our donors. And he felt structured by the past in a way, and that this was sort of what was inevitably going to happen. But as he started sharing his ideas for what could happen, I think we both sensed the possibility that we didn't need to be irrevocably tied to some past, right? That we could work together to overcome some failure of imagination that had come before us to do something different. And so we would take those steps in the coming years. And it was these kinds of experiences, but then also meeting young people like ourselves in other parts of the world in many ways. And this is the Rwanda Village Concept Project. One of the things I want to share with you guys is around the time of our sort of founding year, one of the first groups of students that wanted to actually start a chapter, this is their email actually, was in Rwanda, right? So one of the first chapters one of the first groups of students that wanted to start a chapter wasn't in the US. It was in rural Rwanda. And so this is a group of students that we ultimately ended up forming a partnership with the GW chapter. And we had a chance to visit, Peter and myself. There's Hover and Eddie, Hover attending a summit between Peter and myself. And listening to their stories of how they had experienced the genocide, what Alyssa talked about, but then wanted to work to build their country and work together with others like us to do it, was really inspiring at the time, and still is. Right? Because it was another example of maybe we could overcome these failures of imagination, right? But we were also part of a broader story that was happening in the world at that time. And it's important to remember that. And this is a picture that we often shared in our initial leadership institutes and summits. And it's an uncomfortable one, but it's an important one to recognize. This is Joseph June. And at the time of this picture, he's 26 years old. And he was basically months away, maybe weeks away from dying. His parents had already bought his coffin. And we're talking about central Haiti here at the time. And he's showing up to a clinic run by Partners in Health. And this was at a time in which the idea that the lives of those living in settings like Haiti mattered, that access to treatment could be a right, was sort of seen as crazy to a lot of people. In fact, people talked about, well, people like Joseph can't exactly tell time, so how can they take their medicines, right? And we were part of this moment in which there was a moral urgency, I think, around trying to address these kinds of failures of imagination, that this could be a reality in the world. And the HIV/AIDS movement in many ways helped create the construct of global health that we operate in, perhaps. And this is what was possible when you can overcome that kind of failure of imagination in terms of HIV/AIDS treatment, being able to, 6 months later, this is a picture of Joseph, right? This is the kind of transformation that we were seeing as students on university campuses taking place. And as I was traveling around and meeting students who wanted to be part of that, we recognized that, one, we needed to learn from the experiences of those actually experiencing directly poverty and poor health. But then also we needed to probably think beyond just one campus or one community. It needed to be something larger. I think what drew a lot of us was a sense that we wanted to tie our own individual destinies to something larger than our own. And that was part of the impetus around why we ended up at that first summit, right? So I wanted to bring you guys back to why it even made sense for a group of students to be talking about these issues in a classroom at Northwestern or at a chalkboard, okay? And so this is just a group of, this is a lot of the members of that sort of founding era of GlobeMed, the global, what is now the global headquarters. And it was an intentional choice, really, right? To think beyond one campus in one place. Remember at the time, the idea also of forming a network was sort of seen as a bit crazy. And we've got some great supporters in the room like Brian Hansen that helped us overcome the skepticism around the idea of forming a network. I remember one university administrator that will not go named, that will be unnamed. When I first pitched the idea of having a conference with students from beyond Northwestern, she just looked at me, really? Like, just keep it to Northwestern, don't think too big. You're thinking too big. Luckily we had people like Brian who thought that big is exactly where we should be going, right? And so I think the sort of the unifying theme around that time was this like counter failures of imagination with bold aspiration. And that's what really, I think, out of that summit came that kind of energy to do that kind of work. We didn't know exactly what it would mean, but there was that kind of spirit. And we could say the rest is history, but of course with an organization like GlobeMed, what's amazing is that there's generations of new talent, energy, ideas that have continued to confront what are the failures of imagination that we need to sort of build better and address. And so there's a whole series of 10 years that I can't even begin to express, right? I can only sort of give little hints around some of the big things that have happened. To get the order right here. So one of the things that we did early on in 2009, 10, we thought, well, you know, let's not just be a small group of university campuses even, let's actually scale to a large number of university campuses. And so this was the website, a campaign that we started, Imagine 2030. A lot of our chapter founder selection process, being able to scale chapters, came out of that work. And so that's how we got from 40 students to 250 in a room like today, right? That led to new partners and communities that we could work with around the world, with partner search fellows going out and actually linking those chapters with new communities, right? We were able to launch partner forums where we were actually being able to bring the voices of the communities that we were working with directly into our work in a much more intentional way. And there's so much more, right? The way we've been able to embrace diversity and inclusion and really a fuller notion of identity and participation into this work. And so now we're here, 10 years. And so sort of, as I've been thinking about what this moment is about, you know, we didn't imagine 10 years ago that we could be here, right? The future isn't what it used to be. And in many ways, I think, today, we could sort of go along, we have a fork in the road, I think. So certain moments are crystallizing. And we could pursue a path where 10 years from now at GlobeMed we come back and it looks relatively the same. But in many ways, I think these kinds of moments are opportunities for the kind of group that we've got and the kinds of minds that are in this room to, again, ask those questions around how do we counter those big failures of imagination in the world? And start taking those first steps so that we build a future that we can't even imagine. So that 10 years from now or 15 years from now, when students are coming back to this kind of a meeting, there's realities that they're taking for granted because of some of the steps that and the ideas that you imagined starting this afternoon or this morning, right? I don't have a sense for all those failures of imagination, but I do have a sense for maybe starting a conversation about what they could be. So I'm gonna sort of, as I've been having my own journey, sort of the observations that I've been making, I'm gonna put it together in a sort of simple framework, just to sort of work with. But you're gonna have to follow with me on this journey here in the next couple slides. But basically boils down to the way we think about place, the way we think about planet, and the way we think about basically people and populations. So this was an interesting Twitter-verse sort of saga a couple weeks ago. So President Obama was in Cuba at a baseball game, and ESPN, the sports news site, basically decided to post a photo from the stadium, looking out at the neighborhoods around the stadium of Havana. And meanwhile, next to the stadium in Havana, they wanted to show this basically backward country where there was a dilapidated, decaying neighborhood, where people's sense of place was quite disoriented and really where there were no aspirations. And what was interesting is actually people started posting photos of places all around the world, really, where there's stadiums and neighborhoods and places where there isn't a sense of possibility or agency. And so I bring this up only in the sense that often we talk about community. We, I think, have to be vigilant over the fact that community shouldn't become a word as a monolith. Because really when we think about a place, it's a mosaic of food systems, of health clinics, of places of worship, of so many different varieties that bring life together in a place. And I think one of the failures of imagination that a lot of people are experiencing now, think about a place that you're living in right now, or a place that many of you, whether through a partnership or working in, whether there's a way of assembling people together to actually build a future that they are proud to be a part of. And this goes for whether we're talking about Harlem, I would argue, or places like Monrovia. And I want to show the picture. I show the picture of Monrovia in particular because it's actually during the Ebola outbreak. And so this is a confrontation you see between soldiers and people living in one of the slums that was really affected by Ebola, West Point. You have a direct confrontation because the simple response to the epidemic would be essentially to quarantine an entire group of people and isolate them. Let the epidemic burn out in a group of people, so to say, right? It's interesting in the sense of when we think about a place and the people living in it, what we know about the epidemic, interestingly enough, it was actually the last line of defense ultimately wasn't the US military with huge deployments of clinics. In fact, most of that ended up sitting isolated, not the beds weren't filled. This is a paper from the Annals of Internal Medicine in terms of how a lot of the interruption of the epidemic itself was based on community-based initiatives. And it's a paper written by a lot of the leading figures in the Ebola response. These are Liberian voices writing that paper. So I want to shift from thinking about place, just to seed some thoughts, to what does the epidemic actually teach us? when we actually zoom out too, in terms of the forces that are bearing into a place, oftentimes are much larger scale. And it's important to keep that in sight as well. So epidemics like Ebola are never singular. They're plural in the sense that they reveal fissures, many other problems that exist. And of course, in the case of the outbreak, we know that where it happened was long-term underinvestment in actual health systems in a post-conflict setting. And as we're experiencing now, say something like Zika, long-term challenges in terms of how we think about reproductive rights and women's health, right? And so these require also thinking about issues like health in a global context, in addition to thinking about how health is embodied in a place by people living there. And one of the things we also know is thinking about climate change and the environment as well as part of this conversation that I think we need to be having. We know that by 2030, 2 degrees Celsius is a possibility in terms of increase. And we know that with 2 degrees Celsius increase, we're talking about extreme weather events, agricultural productivity loss, and water rise. Right? Places like Bangkok could be underwater. It's not that far-fetched. And when we look at where in the world is going to be most affected by this challenge, right? Raise your hand if you've got a partner organization that is in one of the places that's red or orange. Pretty much everybody, right? And so this is the kind of imagination we're going to have to think with about how to counter this kind of possible future. I also think about what's happening in the world around migration. So we're in the middle of one of the largest mass migrations over the last 100 years since World War II. So 60 million people right now are refugees or displaced. This is a great map showing where people are coming from and going to. Raise your hands if you're a partner organization in one of these settings, if you're working with a partner organization in one of these settings, right, where there's an arrow, an origin point. Or raise your hand if you're living in a country where people are trying to get to, right? So the reason I bring this up is I think Abdul raised a lot of interesting points yesterday about the hyperlocal. Really, really important points about health being hyperlocal. But the challenges of health, while they are hyperlocal, we need to remember that they're hyperconnected and interdependent, right? And if these 3 maps don't convince you of that, well, I mean, I'm pretty sure they do. So they're pretty great maps for showing this. And in the midst of all of this, right, another great change that we're part of is the composition of identity, literally, of who is us. People around us that we're going to be living with, working with, building futures with, hopefully. Right? In the US, we know that in the next 30 years, we'll be a majority minority country. Right? Around the world, the youth bulge that is often talked about, in terms of where young people are living right now, ages between 10 and 24, only 17% are living in Europe and North America, right? Now, this could lead us into a future where there's a clash of civilizations, identity politics, and conflict, or we could also perhaps think differently about the way we build the fabric of human identity. Hopefully strong enough that we can confront past and pains, but also flexible and open enough to build together. So those are just sort of seeds. You've got your own stories of things that you're observing in the world. But I hope that these can be sort of grounded conversations about the real challenges that we can work on together, because these don't have any simple answers, right? There are those who think about the answer, right? So this is one way of responding to those situations. So this is just in terms of walls built to cordon off national boundaries. In the last decade, we see a spike after 9/11. One of the places we can look for inspiration is right here in this room and the communities that we work with in GlobeMed, right? And how to counter those failures of imagination. And so really briefly, I'm going to share one story that I'm sure the University of Michigan chapter can tell much better than I am. Where are you guys? At the University of Michigan. So their partner community in El Salvador, Amonchea is the organization they work with as a school. It's a place where, if you're a young person, you've seen generations of people that are your mothers and your fathers and your uncles and your aunts leaving because of conflict, drug trade, foreclosed futures. And what this school is doing actually is, in many ways, one could consider it a migration prevention strategy. But what it really is, and how it gets to that, is because it's investing in young people in the school itself to build the future where they're living. And so one of the curriculum here in a K-8 school is actually to get young people in Amanchea to work on problem-based and action-based curriculum, where they actually take on problems that they want to work on to create the future that they want to see. And one of the stories that I've heard from Alyssa, which is one of my favorites, is the group between 4th and 6th grade realized that they were having a huge issue with clean water in their communities and in their school. And they started that as their research project, right? So there's probably lots of people who have done doctoral dissertations on this, but this is 4th and 6th grade through 6th grade. And what they did is they did the research and figured out which water treatment plant was the cause of what they were experiencing. Actually happened to be across the border, not in El Salvador, but in Honduras. They asked the water treatment plant, they challenged them in terms of what should be done. The water treatment plant ended up saying, well, talk to the mayor. The mayor said, talk to the water treatment plant. The student said, screw this, we're gonna just write about this in the national newspaper. and that pressure actually created change, right? And the University of Michigan chapter now is partnering with this school to work on agricultural projects in the community itself, to be able to produce healthy foods for the school. And I think about this kind of model of interdependence in the world is a much different one than is often talked about, right? And so we can have hope that we've also already got a starting point, because the things that I just pointed out, those huge challenges, they're daunting, right? But they can start in places like this, where you've got an anchor in any place, you're taking on planetary, in many ways, challenges around migration and development. And you're doing this in ways that are bridging differences of identity across borders, right? Now, what I want to also talk about is from 10 years ago, there's opportunities that are in front of us that we didn't even have. A lot of them are technological in nature, but it's pretty interesting and I think fun to note the fact that when we were starting out 10 years ago, a lot of these things were either in their first year or in their infancy. I still remember trying to use Skype, and it did not work well at all to try and connect with students at other chapters, right? We didn't actually have ways of connecting in the kinds of ways that we have today. And these are now global in nature. If you look at smartphones, the iPhone did not exist in 2006, right? Smartphones, we all had dumb phones, right? And if you look at the growth of mobile technology in the world, so this is the top map is the last 5 years versus the previous 5 years, 2001 to 2006, and it's getting cut off here, probably because it's stable. But the growth has been all across the world, in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia in particular, right? The way we can connect with people is fundamentally different than it was 10 years ago. And these are tools that we can deploy and use. The ways we can, supposed to say, knowledge and learning, in terms of the ways we can learn too, we've got more at our fingertips in terms of data and information, whether it's online courses, whether it's just being able to share information on the cloud. I also think, in addition to that, just the basic work of ethnography, of observing people, is still a really powerful way of learning about the world. And I think a lot of you already are doing that with your partners. And then we think about all the different vehicles in terms of ways we can create change. Because we've got ways of being able to share knowledge and information, I think we have much better awareness of all the different tools that we've got at our fingertips. There isn't one right how, often. And so I'm just putting out everything, because we should talk about it all, and the ways we can use different methods and practices in the work that we do, right? So ways to communicate and connect, the ways we can share knowledge and learn, the different vehicles we have for creating change, all of these we should grab hold of as really unlocking so many opportunities for the ways we can do work over the next 10 years. Recombinations that I'm not even imagining, right? That you can come up with in a small group probably. Still, with all of these opportunities, I think a lot of questions still remain about, I often talk to seniors and people who have left GlobeMed after a few years, who can contribute, right? Who can be part of this? I think things that we've learned over the past 10 years is where we started off in a point where global health was largely seen as North and South connecting on issues of disease. We know now that I think a different way of conceiving of this frame, it's actually just a collection of challenges requiring diverse responses and solutions that link people far and near. So it changes the way we think about the issue itself, right? It's not one, it's a whole collection of different things we could be working on. And also geography. It's not North and South, it's linking people in far and near, different ways. This also means that in terms of what we do, it should expand the visions for what you think you can contribute, because actually it's going to require a whole different array of people, strategies, and approaches. And oftentimes, perhaps the best way of thinking this through is having conversations with communities and in settings like this, but also listening to the voice that is within you, right? And the journey that this will be. Its leadership and action on this is not a destination or a position. It is fundamentally a journey of trialing and error, and asking questions. And the bottom is then we could be just a collection of individuals, right? That would be what I said in the second point. That would be sort of what maybe I'm implying. And that's also not true, right? Because at the end of the day, there is still a sense that, and a strong sense that what's binding us together is that the world as it is and the world as it could be, that difference is just not one we're accepting, right? We're choosing not to accept it. We're trying to shorten the distance. And that is an orienting value. And that means that the values we speak of can't be slogans. They have to be tied to pragmatic pursuits, right? And that's where a lot of the learning and growth will come from along this journey. So I still think, though, along this, there's voices that are within every one of us of skepticism, of isolation. And I think it comes from this idea that we have this certainty, perhaps in our college years, perhaps with GlobeMed, the work that we're doing, and what it means, and the vehicle that it represents. And then you leave it and you go to other places and you try and taking on new challenges, and there's uncertainty, right? And that distance, that journey between certainty and uncertainty could result in feelings or emotions of despair, isolation, or even the outcome of just disengagement. It doesn't matter, or I'm just not part of this anymore. I think instead we could reframe that and actually to fundamentally just flip it on its head. It's the best way of dealing with it in many ways. Because what would be more boring than knowing the answers to all the different questions that we've got, right? I mean, we've got the distance between certainty and uncertainty can actually be deeply generative. It can lead to ideas that we couldn't imagine. We could actually position this as a sense of gratitude that we get to work on complex and hard problems. And that because of this, we should lean into that ambiguity. So what I would challenge all of us to do is to dare to engage on these issues with complexity, and dare to engage complexity and uncertainty with a sense of gratitude. There's a lot that I think we can learn and create in the world because we take that posture to it. This is one of my favorite quotes from Sir Francis Bacon. If a man will begin with certainties, he shall end in doubts. But if he will be content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties. Just thinking about the way we ask questions and the way we pursue action a bit differently can fundamentally change the way we bring ourselves into it. So I want to tell you really briefly to end a personal story, because along this journey, I've also had deep and large voices often of cynicism even, I'd say. of a sense of self-doubt. And I think that's natural, and it's okay to actually name it. I've been working on a project over the last 2 years where I was looking at a case study for a larger question I was wrestling with, which is the sense that we live in this high technology economy and society, but that people aren't necessarily benefiting and sharing in that future. And so I took a case study on of looking at this one medicine for patients with hepatitis C. And this is a chemical compound called sofosbuvir. And it's a disease that affects quite a few people globally. You won't hear about it as much because it's slow moving, unlike HIV/AIDS. It takes a bunch of years to have its effects. And it affects mostly people who inject drugs, incarcerated populations, people co-infected with HIV/AIDS. And the simple story here is that the drug has been priced in many markets out of reach. So the numbers here in the US and across Europe are over 50,000. The list price in the US is 94,500. And the company over the last 2 years has made $31 billion of profit, or of revenue, I should say. And just to put that in comparison, the entire federal budget for what we spend on scientific research from the NIH is $31.2 billion in 1 year. So the amount of revenues for one drug, one medicine, over 2 years matches what we spend on scientific research in 1 year. And so this is a hard and challenging problem. There is a simple frame around it that I'm presenting here. What I've tried to do is actually look at the problem from every perspective. And it's taking me on a dizzying journey. So I've interviewed or met with almost every actor involved in the system, from the CEO of the corporation to the senators on both Democratic and Republican parties, to patients, to a clinic in Los Angeles where there were 70 patients waiting with only one getting access. All sorts of people, including next month I get to do this Mick Jagger's film. And along the way, when you're trying to unlock sort of the ways we can create bold solutions around this is how my brain mostly feels. And that's where I have experiences of self-doubt. And I don't follow my own advice, which is to embrace this complexity with a sense of gratitude. So sometimes I listen to that better part of my mind and my heart in terms of that advice. And then there's experiences that come along the way. And I want to tell you about just one. And it starts in the back of a taxi cab. I was coming home from India actually, to Cambridge. I was in the train station, waiting for a cab. I got picked up. And the taxi driver starts asking me about, where are you from? Well, I said, I guess at that moment I felt like I was from India. So I said I was coming in from India, I'm an Indian. And he asked me, or he said, well, those Indians, they have a lot of good doctors over there. And he didn't know the fact that I was also studying medicine. Didn't mention that to him. And I asked him why he knew that. Why did he know that there were good doctors in India? And then we somehow got sidetracked because I just asked him where he was from. And he talked about where he was from is northern Afghanistan, Sherbagan. And I asked him why he was here in Cambridge, driving me back to my apartment. And it turns out that he was part of a migration that started not in these recent years that we often hear about in Europe. His migration started in 2001, just before 9/11. And he spent 9 months trying to come from Afghanistan to the UK. He shared little bits of his journey. I've since gotten to know much more of it. And it's quite an extraordinary journey. His actually went a little bit more north through Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, but a lot of the forms of transportation to get to Cambridge were basically the ones that you're seeing on the slide. It's hard for me to even imagine how we got to that point, but there was a sense that in Afghanistan at that time, there was no opportunity with the Taliban taking deeper route, though 9/11 happened along this journey that he was on. So the experience of them being called an Osama who's coming here along the way was one he had to confront. In fact, in the schools when he got to the UK, which he couldn't really participate in after about 6 months, he dropped out. The reason we were also talking though, by the end of that conversation, as he was dropping me back in front of my flat, I went back, how did you know about doctors in India? Turns out that his mom had just gone to India about 6 months before. I asked him why his mom had gone. No, she's got this liver thing. I should have mentioned hepatitis C is a liver disease, so now you can see where this is going. And turns out that the medicine that she had gotten while she was in India was an old medicine. Didn't really quite work. It was an injectable. And he was expressing to me the frustrations that he had because in northern Afghanistan, they don't even have health workers to administer the injections for his mom, nor do they have the electricity to actually power the fridge that it required. I asked him if he knew about these new medicines that I happened to be researching. He said he hadn't. And we just basically sat in front of my apartment and he didn't take his next call. And we just started having a conversation about what it would take for his mom to go back to India and take these medicines. So this is the journey that his mom has had to make now over the past year. So she goes from Sheher Bagan to Mazar-e-Sharif to Kabul to Delhi. She's actually there right now, this week, because she's gotten the medicines that I talked about. And the test should be coming back whether she's cured of the disease. I share these two migration stories in a sense, though, as I end here, because this is just sort of something happened along the way as I was doing my research. And it's a relationship that I've formed with this taxi driver named Jalal. And so he and I meet up for coffee every other week or so. We talk about our different journeys. We're about the same age. We've experienced life really differently. And I think about the kind of will that he's had to, and his mom has had to experience access to basic health, and also for him to have an opportunity and a shot in life. And he is now actually just this past month started his first degree program. He's going back to school, and he's doing it through a thing that wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago, through an online course. And so I'm signed up as his English tutor. And so we meet up and talk about grammar. And I think about that story, and then I think about the opportunities and the privilege that we have. And so in the face of cynicism, complexity, and self-doubt, I think that hope and imagination is really a moral choice that we get to make, right? And so that's the ways that I counter some of those emotions within me. And I think I also think about the moment from 10 years ago and the groups of students that have coursed through this organization. I'm reminded of the audacity of that group of students from 10 years ago. Many of us were still teenagers who dared that the future would not be a place to be arrived at, but a place to be created. And if the people in this room and what we've created is an early report card on that future, I think we can be all really proud. But more than pride, I think we can have profound aspiration. Because when I look around this room, what do I see? I see students are so much savvier and smarter than we were 10 years ago. And don't let anyone tell you that you need a bunch of degrees and experience to get going. It can happen right now. I see teams of students at chapters who are going to build across differences to invent completely new projects and ideas with department communities and on campuses. And don't let anyone tell you that the project of embracing the full humanity and potential of another is some trite, banal project. I think it's the most creative, radical, pragmatic project of our time. And I see people who are going to pursue lives of deep meaning and purpose, and it's going to look all really diverse and different. People who are going to create art to provoke understanding, organize communities for political change, develop Python code to improve services, unlock the voices of students in classrooms, accompany patients through experiences of suffering, build more humane systems that challenge the status quo. Don't let anyone tell you that living with purpose is a linear or singular path. I think it's anything but often. And so most of all, the message that I want to leave you guys with is I think we're a room full of people who are going to combine that audacity to dare that started 10 years ago, that happens every fall and at every summit, but also with this embrace of complexity and challenge, the richness of that. Right? And I think if we do that, we don't even know where we'll end up in 10 years or 15 years, and that's what's beautiful. Thanks.
Um,